Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. A monster next couple of days for Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks as it pertains to the recruiting trail. Now, I think you got to quickly start with five-star quarterback Jerry Curtis, who is just clearly the crown jewel, you might say, for Oregon in this 2026 class. Was on campus for Oregon over the last couple of days, heading back to the East Coast, going to visit Georgia. Wouldn't be surprised if we see a decision coming from Jared Curtis over the next couple of days. I'm not an insider. The Oregon fans, y'all know I don't try to pretend to be an insider. I ain't no insider. The way I look at this recruitment, I feel really good about Dan Lang and the Oregon Ducks. And for a couple of different reasons. One, you look at Jared Curtis and say he is the top target for Oregon. You look back at the last couple of classes, especially going back to last year with the Corey and Moore, when Oregon wants a player, they are going to roll out the red carpet. They are going to push their chips into the middle of the table and go out and get that player. They did it with the Corey and Moore. To me, I get a very similar feeling from this Oregon program about five-star quarterback Jared Curtis. The second thing is Oregon's getting to a point where they can just sell on-field production and on-field results in terms of going after quarterbacks. Now, you look at Oregon, hey, we took Bo Nix from Auburn, brought him over to Eugene, Oregon, turned him into a first-round NFL draft pick, turned him into a Heisman caliber quarterback. You look at Dylan Gabriel, very similar conversation. I mean, the 3 years that Dan Lanning has been at Oregon, quarterback play has been very, very good. This is kind of a quiet trend that we've seen play out over the last couple of years. Oregon is all of a sudden becoming like this destination spot for top tier wide receivers and top tier quarterbacks. I think that means something to a guy like Jerry Curtis. So those two factors playing into account, I feel good about where Oregon sits with Jared Curtis. Now, that's not even like some of the bigger storylines that we're going to see because Oregon starting off spring ball, practicing today, practicing Saturday. They're going to have a ton of blue chip prospects coming on campus over the next couple of days. Want to get into some of those names as well before we do. And as always, to the Oregon fans, appreciate you guys. And we got spring practice rolling around. We got spring visits starting to pick up. It's going to be really fun talking about this program. The amount of support y'all continue to show means the absolute world. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, the position I want to start with is wide receiver, because this is normally how you see it play out, where whether it's a quarterback committing and all of a sudden these wide receivers saying, hey, I wouldn't mind going out and catching footballs from a guy like Jerry Curtis. You see quarterbacks and wide receivers, you can build momentum on the recruiting trail with these two positions. And let's start with Chris Henry Jr., who I think will be very hard to flip from Ohio State. But when he committed to Ohio State, he was living in the Midwest. Now he's out at Mater Dei in California. This gives Oregon a really good shot to flip a guy like Chris Henry Jr. And we've talked about this kid for the last 12 months. He's one of, if not the most talented wide receiver in the 2026 cycle. Now he has a little bit of a slide in the rankings, you might say. That has, to me, a lot more to do with him not being healthy as a junior in high school, as opposed to him just not being the football player that we thought he was 12 months ago. I look at Chris Henry, I continue to feel the same way. 6'5", 205, big time athlete for the size. It's kind of the combination of the size, his ability to go up and make plays in contested catch situations. And then you look at his movement skills, whether it's long speed, whether it's separating in his route tree, whether it's operating after the catch. You don't see these guys come along very often with the size that Chris Henry has, but also the movement skills. He's just a tough matchup for defensive backs. Like if you're a big enough defensive back to deal with Chris Henry's size, like chances are you ain't fast enough to run with Chris Henry down the field. That kind of matchup nightmare is something Oregon wants. And I think Oregon has a really good shot at a guy like Chris Henry Jr. And then the other one from the state of Texas. And again, we've seen Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks go down into the state of Texas and go grab some top prospects. In fact, they've been doing a great job in the state of Texas over the last couple of classes. Jalen Lott, listed as an athlete. I think he's going to play wide receiver at the college football level. The reason I believe that is he's too good with the football in his hands. You look at some guys and say, yeah, he could be a really good defensive back if he wants to. Could probably be good at a couple of different positions. But when you turn on the film and you see him with the football in his hands, and you see just the natural playmaker in the movement skills and the ability to make people miss, the ability to win vertically down the field, you start digging into the athletic profile. State champ in the long jump. Talk about twitch. You talk about explosiveness. And state champ in the long jump. 10-9 in the 100-meter dash, which I think he plays faster than the 10-9 number that we see in that 100-meter. I look at Jalen Lott and say, really just a good athlete that would be good at a lot of different positions. Sign me up for him having the football in his hands, especially in an Oregon offense that what does Oregon historically do really well on the offensive side of the football? Get their football players the ball in space. Jalen Lott would be elite in this Oregon offense. And I think it's a really attractive offense for a guy like Jalen Lott because, hey, what's my best skill set? Having the ball in my hands. Go to Oregon, you're going to have the football in your hands in space a lot over the next couple of years. It's kind of what we mean by like what Oregon's done the last couple of years with not only the quarterbacks of Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel, but guys like Tez Johnson or Trayshawn Holden, even going back to Troy Franklin. Oregon seems to be a destination spot for some of the best wide receivers and quarterbacks. Now, moving over to the defensive side of the football, the name that I am most intrigued with here is Tyler Atkinson. Oregon's kind of been just laying in the weeds a little bit here. Well, historically, how Dan Lanning likes to do it sometimes. This will be his first time on campus in Eugene. He's obviously from the state of Georgia, one of the best linebackers in the country. Fun fact, actually, Tyler Atkinson's been that guy for so long that Dan Lanning was recruiting Tyler Atkinson when he was the defensive coordinator at Georgia. So there's that pre-existing relationship between Tyler Atkinson and Dan Lanning that I think gives Oregon a real chance to get in this recruitment. This kid he's a freak show, but I think more importantly, he's the kind of linebacker Oregon needs in this modern era of college football, where we talked about, some of the things or some of the areas that Oregon maybe fell short in the 2024 year. Part of it was the athletes at the linebacker spot. You want to beat teams consistently like Ohio State or a team like Texas with all that speed out on the outside. You got to have linebackers that can go sideline to sideline and play in space. There's probably not a better linebacker than a guy like Tyler Atkinson to do so. And again, another name at linebacker, Talona Illy. Now, USC is turning it up for Talona Illy, and rightfully so, one of the best linebackers in the country. Oregon has kind of long been the team considered to land Talona Illy, is probably the best way of saying it. There's been some momentum with USC. Can Oregon grab that momentum back in this 2026 class? You look at USC and Oregon, there are some fascinating recruiting battles that you're going to see play out. And I don't think it's all that crazy to talk about Dan Lanning in Oregon and Lincoln Riley and USC both landing top 5 classes in the country, because the amount of blue chip talent that both of these programs are in for is pretty insane. Now, the next name, Tom Tupoi, a guy that we broke down when he committed to Oregon, a guy that I am extremely high on in this 2026 cycle. This is another one where, hey, he's committed to Oregon. This is one that you're going to have to recruit like he's uncommitted to you until he signs in December, because Lincoln Riley and USC are pushing really hard for Tom. Another one of those, hey, we want a defensive line that's dominant, that's elite. We got to win these kind of battles at the high school ranks. One of the things that has me increasingly buying stock in Oregon, one of the many reasons, is what they've done on the defensive line. When Dan Lanning first got to Oregon, the defensive line just wasn't good enough. He didn't have enough game records. It's slowly and consistently gotten better to a point that in 2024, I don't know if I go as far as saying the Oregon defensive line was elite, but it was really dang good, way better than where Dan Lanning took over this program in 2022. How do you want that defensive line to get to elite level? These kind of wins on the recruiting trail. And I really do believe that if you want having an elite defensive line is huge. You look at all the past national champs going back to Georgia in 2021, Georgia 2021, Georgia 2022, Michigan 2023, Ohio State 2024. What do all those programs have in common? They got a lot of things in common, but all those programs had really good defensive lines in the national championship years. Talk about maybe a reason Georgia has kind of fallen off over the last couple of years. It's because I don't think their defensive line was as dominant as it was in the early 2020s. If Oregon wants to get over the hump, I think it starts with having a dominant defensive line, and I think it starts with winning these kind of recruiting battles on the high school trail. Last one I'll throw in, and a guy that I think just kind of flies under the radar because he's from the state of Washington, Derek Coleman Brusa. Buzzing his film this morning, I think this is the first time we're talking about him. His speed to power is kind of reminds you of Tatum Tuioti a little bit. He's not the biggest cat, and he's not going to be one of those guys that walks into a room and makes your jaw drop. But you turn on the film and say he knows how to play with leverage, has a ton of power in his hands, all the same things we talk about with Tatum Tuioti, who, again, is not a guy that stands out in terms of first one off the bus, but a really good football player. Derek Coleman Brusa gives me those very similar vibes. This is a feels like a big weekend for Oregon to build some momentum. And it might start with an early commitment to Jerry Curtis, but it is going to mean a lot more with some of these top guys coming on campus for Oregon over the next couple of days. We'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll see if we get any commitments to break down over the next couple of days. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.